budget would never balance, notwithstanding the huge tax increases. That's what's wrong with the President's budget. It's why it's not going to pass today. It's why it didn't pass last year.
Very clearly, what this body is saying, the United States Senate and the House of Representatives, when they vote on the President's budget, they're saying very clearly the President's budget spends too much, it taxes too much, and it borrows too much, and it doesn't solve any problem. I think that's the very clear, unanimous message, actually, at this point from these bodies. This is not a serious budget proposal.
If I could just add one other item.
My colleague said, we all know the big problem here is spending on entitlements, the so-called mandatory spending. Well, the only thing mandatory about it is that it has to be spent unless we say something different. But we don't have the courage around here to reform our entitlement programs to the point that they're going to be available for at least our kids by the time they retire, and in some cases they may not even be available for some of us. And the other thing that I would want to say about the President's budget is that it continues this glide path to insolvency for Medicare, which the recent trustees report says has an unfunded liability of $26.4 trillion. So in addition to spending too much, taxing too much, and borrowing too much, it doesn't do anything about the biggest problem we have, which is the broken entitlement programs that are not going to work for the people who are currently anticipating that they'll be there for them when they retire.
Senator Kyle, that's an excellent point. Now, if I could call on my colleague, Senator Coburn, who, as much as any member of the United States Senate, has been the watchdog when it comes to spending and programs that duplicate each other. He has been the person that oftentimes has stood on the floor alone and pointed out to everybody how much waste there is in the federal government. So, Senator Coburn, you have been a great leader. You were on the Fiscal Commission, member of the original Gang of Six. I'd like to hear your views on the budgetary mess that we find ourselves in now.
Well, let me first of all thank my colleague. I'd ask unanimous consent. I have a couple of charts that are oversized, and the reason they're oversized is because you can't get it all on one chart, and I'd ask unanimous consent to display those charts, if I might.
Without objection.
What most people don't realize is the federal government is now twice the size it was in 2001. Now think about that. Think about that. We're spending twice as much money as we did in 2001. Matter of fact, if you go back 15 years, our deficit this year is bigger than what our entire budget was. That's how out of control the federal government is. And the point of a budget, there is a political reason we're not having a budget. Everybody understands that. Nobody's going to say it. The political reason that no budget was proposed and run through the Senate to create a conference committee with the House is because we don't want to make the hard choices in election year. And budgets for families are about making hard choices. And yet here we're supposed to represent leadership in our country, and we refuse to make hard choices about the direction. You know, I had the great opportunity to speak with some members in the War College class here not long ago, and we got into talking about budget. And they said, do you realize how difficult it is for us to try to spend money when you send us a continuing resolution and we don't know about it until 10 days before it's going to take effect? How difficult it is for us to try to manage in a prudent way the money that the federal government spends when we have no budgetary guidelines? There's waste out the kazoo when you ask us to do that. So the very fact, regardless of the fact that there's a law that says we will pass a budget, which has been totally ignored by the majority leader, is the consequences of that are tremendous. What most people talk about is how do we get out of the problem? And what I would put forward in terms of our budget, there's not a problem in front of our country we can't solve. What we lack is leadership to pull us together as Americans to say, here's the problems, here are the solutions, let's find the compromise in the middle for the solutions, and let's solve our problem. We have refused to do that. But most importantly, we refuse to look at ourselves And I have a couple of examples. The GAO put out its second annual report. The first one was last year. The second annual report this year in terms of duplicated programs. And we've had amendments on this floor fail routinely that said we ought to know what we're doing before we pass another bill. We ought to know what's already out there. That's been rejected by my colleagues. But I'm going to show you charts that shows you how ridiculous we are in terms of how we're well-meaning but absolutely stupid in terms of how we address problems that we perceive are the federal government's role. The GAO put out a list of duplications, and I'm just going to read a few of them. I've given speeches on the floor on others, but 209 different programs, 209 different programs in the federal government for science, technology, engineering, and math initiatives for our education system. So we just spend $3 billion a year on that. The overlap is unbelievable. And here's the chart that shows all the different programs with all the different agencies involved, all of them overlapping, most of the money wasted in terms of how we spend it because there's no concentration, there's no coordination, and what we have is a ridiculous array. Not that it's wrong to want to have more science, more technology, more engineering, and more math students, but what we've done is we're spending all the money on the bureaucracy when we could have 5 programs. One for upper level, one for lower level, one for minorities, one for disadvantaged, one for others. And here's the complex. It's mind-boggling how many programs we have, and there's not a metric to measure whether any one of these is effective. And that's $3 billion a year. I would tell you that we could have 1/10 as many programs and spend 1/2 as much money and have more students come out with science, technology, engineering, and math backgrounds. But we've decided to do it piecemeal and never do the oversight and never consolidate it. If we want to get out of $1 trillion deficits, we do it $1 billion at a time. You don't do it with $1 trillion at a time. The other program, which is even more difficult to ascertain, is in the Department of Justice grants. And let me go through those, if I may, just for a second, to show there's 253 duplicative programs in the Department of Justice. We spend a total of $3.9 billion a year. And here's what GAO tells us. People who apply for one grant in DOJ for one thing turn around and apply for somewhere else for exactly the same thing. The Department of Justice doesn't know. They just gave them 2 grants for exactly the same thing because there's so many different grant programs and nobody's watching the store. So the point is nobody would run their household this way. No business would operate this way. States that are successful don't operate this way. And the reason we do this is because we don't have a budget and we don't have any oversight and we're not minding the store. And the way to change what's coming for our country is to start doing everything that's necessary to address the problem. And the problem is this. We're spending money we do not have on things we do not need. And nobody in Congress wants to do the hard work of ferreting out what works and what doesn't and making the hard choice because every one of these programs has a constituency. And so the parochialism and the constituency and short-term thinking that we're now bound up in keeps us from saving ourselves. Last quote, and I'll finish up with this. John Adams said, "There has yet to be a democracy that did not murder itself." We're on that way if we don't change direction. It's not a Democrat-Republican problem. It's all our problem. And it won't matter what your political persuasion is when we face the very difficult coming times if we don't respond with a cogent budget for this country.
Senator Coburn, thank you so much for that. You look at those charts and you just reach the conclusion inescapably that if we don't start doing oversight and start figuring this out, we're not going to solve this problem. And your reputation as a watchdog of the federal government is well earned. Let me now, if I could, turn to my colleague, Senator Heller. Senator Heller, you bring great experience here. You might be the newest member of the United States Senate. I think you are. But you have great experience on the House side. You've seen how the budget process works there. You now have some experience on the Senate side, and you see the lack of a budget process. I'd like you to offer some thoughts on what's broken here, what we might do to fix this.
I thank the gentleman from Nebraska for yielding time, and also those from Oklahoma and Arizona also for this colloquy that we're having today, and the ability to talk about issues that, frankly, the other side won't talk about. In fact, their conspicuous absence today on the other side is clear of the depth of their budget, as we have, as you know, have not had a budget for the last 3 years. So I rise today in support of a serious debate concerning the direction of our nation. 3 years have passed since Congress adopted a binding budget resolution. In this light, I respectfully submit that the American people do not believe that today's debate is serious. They know the Senate is not going to adopt a budget and once again ignore one of the most basic and important jobs of Congress. What the Senate is doing this week could be considered political comedy if the stakes weren't so high. In fact, the fact is that this is not a serious discussion. In May of last year, the Majority Leader stated, "There's no need to have a Democratic budget, in my opinion. It would be foolish for us to do a budget at this stage." As early as February of this year, it was stated by the Majority Leader that there is no need to bring a budget to the floor this year. If that's the case, this week's debate is nothing more than a political sideshow, and the American people are tired of it. Ever wonder why the approval rating of Congress is so low? They hate Washington because it spends its time on stunts like this instead of working together for the good of the country, pushing votes for campaign press releases instead of solving problems. The bottom line is, if Congress does not do its job, then its members should not get paid. And that is exactly what I have proposed with the No Budget, No Pay Act. The American people know that in an election year, too many of their representatives in Washington are afraid of the tough choices that would help get our nation on a path of fiscal sanity. Most of the people watching the so-called budget debate will witness exactly what they've come to expect from Washington. Republicans blaming Democrats, Democrats blaming Republicans. At the end of the day, all we'll have accomplished is filling another page in the congressional record. Unfortunately, Americans will face the same fiscal disasters that they did before this debate. Unless we change course, federal spending per household is projected to rise to $34,602 by the year 2022, a 15% increase in 1 decade. The government's own actuaries tell us that Medicare is going bankrupt in 10 years. Social Security, 1 decade later. Both sides should be willing to come together to strengthen and preserve these programs for future generations instead of simply ignoring the problems because it's inconvenient in an election year. Our national debt will reach $16 trillion before the end of the year, and the federal government's unfunded obligations will total some $100 trillion. Yet there will be no budget this year, just like there has been no budget for the past 3 years. You cannot look beyond the Beltway and say this failure of leadership hasn't had tremendous impact on the people we represent. National unemployment has registered above 8% for the last 38 months. Nevada has led the nation in unemployment for more than 2 years. Almost everyone I speak to in Nevada, businesses, job creators, elected officials, and families speak of the uncertainty that has characterized their lives in this economy. We're not moving forward as a nation. And it's no surprise to these no-nonsense folks. They know from everyday life in their businesses and in their households that you can't move forward without a plan. When Americans look to Washington, they see no meaningful proposal, no viable plan, and no progress. There are those who claim that the Budget Control Act is a budget, and I strongly disagree. This bill does not establish priorities or a path forward for our nation as a real budget should. It does not provide certainty, nor does it address many of the pressing fiscal problems we have today. If the Budget Control Act was truly a budget, there would be no need for this discussion today. It's past time for Congress to hold itself accountable. That's why I've advocated my No Budget, No Pay Act for nearly a year. My legislation calls on House and Senate to pass a concurrent budget resolution and the regular appropriation bill before the beginning of each fiscal year. Failure to do so would result in a loss of pay until we take our job seriously and make these bills our legislative priority. The Congressional Budget Act of 1974 already requires Congress to pass a budget by April 15th. My bill creates an enforcement mechanism to further encourage members of Congress to do their constitutional duty. I've spoken on this floor previously about no budget, no pay, but I believe now is the time to consider whether we are willing to make this promise to our constituents. I believe it's more important now than ever because the American people are increasingly losing confidence in Congress and their ability to deliver solutions. No budget, no pay is not a silver bullet solution to our nation's fiscal challenges, but it would indicate that we are hearing the concerns of the American people and are willing to participate in the dialogue necessary to get our country moving again. I'm pleased that 10 of my Senate colleagues have co-sponsored this important effort, and others have expressed support for no budget, no pay on the Senate floor. I'm especially grateful to Senators Lieberman and Collins for holding a hearing to discuss no budget, no pay as a meaningful proposal that would help hold Congress accountable to the American people. This bipartisan, bicameral proposal is worthy of the Senate's time if we're serious about regaining the trust of the American people of whom we are supposed to be representing. My colleagues, our nation can literally no longer afford to survive on sound bites and press releases about the importance of budgeting. We need to engage in the serious business of budgeting for our nation's future. That work should start today, and sadly, I simply don't believe we will make the tough choices necessary until members of Congress have more skin in the game. I will continue calling for the adoption of No Pay, No Budget, No Pay Act.
Republicans' time has expired.
Thank you. We yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Will the senator withhold his request? Will he withhold his request?
Yes, I will withhold my request.
Under the previous order, the motion to proceed to House Resolution 2072 is agreed to. The clerk will report.
Calendar number 396, H.R. 2072, an act to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank of the United States and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, there will be 2 hours of debate equally divided between the two leaders or their designees.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that we move to amendment number 2100 to H.R. 2072.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from Utah, Mr. Lee, proposes in amendment number 2100. At the appropriate place, insert the following. Section, termination of Export-Import Bank of the United States.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the reading be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
It's time that we wind down the Export-Import Bank, and my amendment, amendment number 2100, would do precisely that. The American people cannot be the world's financial backstop. The government shouldn't be picking winners and losers. businesses in Utah and across the country are not receiving government help and are shutting their doors after decades serving their communities. We should not, through this government, be adding insult to injury by using tax money they contributed to prop up companies overseas. We need to end the corporate welfare that distorts the market and feeds crony capitalism. The corporations that largely benefit from the Ex-Im Bank should have no trouble marshaling their resources to compete in today's economy. If they are struggling, then they're most likely not deserving of taxpayer help. And if they are turning billions in profit, then they clearly do not need taxpayer-subsidized loans. Further, government subsidies breed undue favoritism from government bureaucrats who control where the money goes. Unless we want more Solyndras, we should end the practice immediately. Some have suggested that the Ex-Im Bank is good for businesses. Mr. President, what's best for American businesses is getting the federal government out of their way, letting them operate without burdensome government regulations and without a complex tax system. Having the government pick winners and losers does not make industries stronger. It makes them more dependent on subsidies. And when government is picking who wins, the loser is always the taxpayer. We have an opportunity today to reverse the status quo and defend the American taxpayer. My amendment winds down the Ex-Im Bank. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, amendment number 2100. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Washington.
I suggest the suspension of the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to urge my colleagues in the Senate to pass the export-import bank legislation that's now before us. This debate this morning is about jobs, it's about manufacturing jobs, and it's about U.S. manufacturing jobs. And that is because this bank is one of the most powerful tools that we have for manufacturing jobs in America. It's a debate about whether this chamber believes that access to financing is a key tool for U.S. companies to compete on an international basis when they are trying to get U.S. manufactured products sold overseas. In fiscal year 2011 alone, the bank supported nearly 290,000 export-created jobs in America. But those are the jobs that are going to be threatened if this chamber does not act. That is because this authority expires on May 31st. That's right, just 16 days from now. And between now and then, the House is in session for only 5 days. So we can't afford to take this to the brink one more time with amendments passed by the Senate today that are really just amendments that are gutting the Ex-Im Bank. These 5 amendments that will be considered basically would lapse the bank's authority, and this would put into the debate more uncertainty about our economy. We need to act now to renew the bank's charter, and businesses can't wait. They need the planning and certainty to hire more people, and failing to act will stifle U.S. economic opportunity. That's why nearly 24 governors, both Democrats and Republicans alike, have urged for the bank's extension, and so has the Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, and Small Business Association. Mr. President, I'd like to enter into the record a chart that is the jobs supported by Ex-Im financing by each state, so that members, if they'd like to, could come down and look at both the revenue that was generated and the jobs that were supported.
Without opposition, without objection.
The default rate on the bank is consistently less than 2%, lower than most commercial lending. So I'm sure we'll hear a lot about that debate today. But since 2005, the Export-Import Bank has returned $3.7 billion to the U.S. Treasury, above and beyond the cost of operation. So yes, my colleagues, this is actually something that is making money for the federal government. So not only is it helping U.S. manufacturers sell their products overseas, financing in a way that I think is equivalent to what the Small Business Administration does, help provide a certain level of financing that makes deals come through. I think that's why you find that banks are supportive of this. The money is back into the U.S. taxpayer's pocket, and it supports us winning in a global situation by getting our products sold. So it has been incredibly helpful to our economy, zero cost to the taxpayers, and, in fact, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office concluded that a 4-year reauthorization of the bank would reduce the deficit by up to $900 million over 5 years. So the bank works for businesses, it works for U.S. taxpayers. So there is a compromise that is before us, and I know that it may not be the compromise. I see my colleague from South Carolina on the floor. It may not be the compromise he or I would have written to this legislation, but nonetheless, it's a compromise and it's time to act. The reason I say that is because so many states also are counting on the Export-Import Bank, just like in Washington State. Pennsylvania, for example, has over $1.4 billion in exports and 9,800 jobs related to the Export-Import Bank. Massachusetts, another state, $566 million. This is from the annual report of the Ex-Im Bank in 2011. So $566 million of economic revenue generated in Massachusetts and over 4,000 jobs. Why? Because we helped Massachusetts exporters get access to capital so that they could sell their products overseas and win in the international marketplace. Texas, another example, $4.9 billion in exports, 35,274 jobs. These are jobs that America needs. This is a global economy in which America needs to be able to compete. So getting access to capital so that products can be sold is a critically important issue. Florida, another great example of the support of the Ex-Im Bank, $1.1 billion in exports and over 760 643 jobs. So another big winner. The state of North Carolina, $456 million in exports and 3,309 jobs. And Ohio, just another example of manufacturers and businesses, $398 million in exports and 2,888 jobs. So while there are many people who would like to say that this program should be discontinued, if they are not in favor, I guess I'm sure some of my colleagues aren't, because there are many programs that they would like to get rid of, I would say this is a program that's good for the U.S. taxpayers. The Ex-Im Bank generates $3.7 billion for U.S. taxpayers since 2005. So what is this debate about? I would say that the underlying amendments that my colleagues are offering are trying to gut the Ex-Im Bank. They simply don't like it, want to get rid of it, or say that it is not a viable tool. I guess because 1 in 4 jobs in Washington State are based on trade, I know how critically important it is, whether you're an agricultural product or you're selling airplanes, whether you're selling music stands, as one company we saw, or you're selling grain silos. You need to be able to compete in an international marketplace, and you need to be able to get sales of those products. So this has been a very viable and important tool. Some of my colleagues have previously raised concerns about the bank's transparency and oversight, and these concerns have been heard and addressed in this legislation. I'd like to talk about the 5 ways that this new compromise bill addresses those concerns. There's more oversight. Under the amended bill, we would have a quarterly report on its default rate, and the first of these reports would be due of September of this year. So the bank has historically maintained a low default rate of less than 2%, but under this provision, if the default rate reaches 2% or higher, the bank will have to develop a plan to fix the problem and report to Congress within 1 month. And if the default rate stays above 2% for more than 6 months, they will be subject to review of an independent auditor. So these, I think, are very viable and important additions to the legislation. And not only would the auditor be there to help fix what was going on, but would have the oversight for anything that was involved with the bank that they needed to report on. There's less risk. Second change to the underlying bill. The Government Accountability Office must study and report back to the bank safeguards that prevent it from taking loans that are too risky. And again, since the bank has had a historically low default rate, we're happy to add this language, but it just is another layer of protection on something that is performing and performing well, but happy to add that to the legislation. More public input. The bank will have to open public comment period for transactions greater than $100 million, and it will have to notify Congress about these transactions, so more transparency on what some consider the bigger financial loans that the bank is involved in. And fourth, more accountability. There's an annual report that the bank has to justify in the need of every transaction. Every transaction. That way, the public will know if the bank has acted because a private lender would not have, or if it acted in response to foreign export credit agencies. And then fifth, the Treasury must engage nations in discussions about the need for export financing worldwide. Now, I know some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would hope that the President would just end all export financing and lead that discussion at the World Trade Organization. I would ask my colleagues, what's the difference between this and the Small Business Administration that provides an opportunity, a bridging of capital between small businesses and the opportunities to join with private financing to make deals happen? I believe because, as I said, I live in a state where we know how beneficial export markets are to our products, whether they're cherries, whether they're apples, whether they're airplanes, whether they're a variety of new technologies. These products are winning the day in an international marketplace, and they're creating jobs. So my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who would like to end this program or to say that it ought to be ended on an international basis, we're happy to hear what the world community wants to debate and discuss in this basis. But I will say, in the moment of crisis of our financial institutions, when one of the supposedly most risk-averse institutions can't figure out why it lost $2 billion, and you want small businesses across America to pay the price for the fact that they can't get financing of their products sold in an international marketplace? We got to wake up here and understand that this is about helping small businesses and helping us win the day for products that are created in the United States and sold abroad. So, Mr. President, the compromise legislation that's offered here today is the best path forward. These amendments are an attempt to gut the underlying bill, and those who would like to stop the authorization of the bank and have it curtailed, because, as I said, we only have about 5 legislative days given the House's schedule to get this done. They would like to tell all those businesses I just mentioned in those states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and others, that we don't know anymore whether this program exists, and let's actually stop the funding and lose jobs. So I know that there are people like in my state, Larry Stone from Scapco or Bill Perdue from Sunoco. They gave me a message that the American people want us to focus on creating jobs and supporting businesses. They want a program like this to continue, and they want the jobs that it creates for their communities. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from South Carolina.
I think I was scheduled. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Senator
Mr.
from
President,
Washington.
I have 4 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They've been approved by the majority and minority leader, and I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that this request be printed in the record.
Without objection.
I apologize to my colleague from South Carolina. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Senator from South Carolina.
I think I was scheduled. I would gladly yield. I think Senator Corker has an amendment, has something to go to at noon. I'd like to yield to him, let him go ahead of me with the understanding I could speak 5 minutes after he's done.
Without objection.
And I'll be very brief.
Senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, I thank the gentleman from South Carolina and certainly the senator from Washington State. I want to say that I put my credentials for supporting exports up against anybody here, and I think the purpose of us being in this body is to try to create good policies, and I have an amendment that I'd like to call up. It's amendment number 2102, which is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Tennessee, Mr. Corker, proposes an amendment number 2102.
Ask unanimous consent to dispense with reading.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'll be very brief. This amendment is very simple and does 2 things that I would think especially the senator from Washington would support after all that we've gone through, and especially in her alluding to some of the most recent developments in the financial system. But what we'll do with this amendment that I hope will receive broad support in this body is, number 1, the Ex-Im Bank is set up to finance transactions that cannot be financed in the private sector. I think that's the purpose for it to be here. And so, number 1, it would cause the Ex-Im Bank to certify that there is no private sector financing, or at least no private sector financing at a reasonable cost before any loan goes through at the Ex-Im Bank. The second piece, which I think is very, very important, the way the Ex-Im Bank is set up right now, there are no capital requirements. The senator from Washington was just talking about something that happened at J.P. Morgan. Fortunately, we have put in place, since the financial crisis, very strong capital requirements at our financial institutions. And what that has done is to make them healthy and to cause them to be able to withstand things that may happen as it relates to default rates or other failures. And so the Ex-Im Bank, believe it or not, is set up to finance things that no other bank will finance, and yet it has no capital requirements other than having to maintain $1 billion. So they're able to loan, per this new legislation, $140 billion, but they only have to have $1 billion in capital reserves, which means you're creating, with this mechanism, 140-to-1 leverage ratios. What we've just gone through with our entire financial system is a process to make sure we have adequate capital. And so what our amendment does is just require that the Ex-Im Bank adhere to the normal, sound financial practices that we want our financial institutions across our country to adhere to by establishing a 10% capital base. So again, I think this is a very good government amendment. We don't want to see the same thing happen with Ex-Im Bank that we've seen happen with Fannie, with Freddie, with so many of our institutions in this country that did not have proper capital reserves. So I urge strong support for this amendment, which will make the Ex-Im Bank something that ensures, or hopefully helps ensure, that our U.S. taxpayers are never in a situation where we have to come to the aid of this institution because it hasn't reserved properly, it doesn't have the proper capital standards in place that I think people in this body on both sides of the aisle have overwhelmingly supported for the private sector. I hate to see us be in a situation where we want to create something in government that risks taxpayers' monies when we've just gone through a process of understanding that it's very important for the financial institutions of our country to have appropriate capital standards. Here we are getting ready to pass legislation on this floor which, I'm sorry, has almost no capital standards in place because you only have to have $1 billion, that's all, the Ex-Im Bank, $1 billion against a $140 billion loan base. I think anybody here thinking about this understands those standards are not nearly appropriate, and I hope that this amendment will receive overwhelming support. It's my sense if we pass this, the House would easily pass this, and contrary to what the senator from Washington was saying, I think this would make the legislation better, and my sense is receive overwhelming support in the House if added to it. With that, I yield the floor, and I thank the gentleman from South Carolina for his tremendous courtesy.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from South Carolina.
Thank you. I rise in support of the compromise that was outlined by Senator Cantwell. And basically, 6 years ago, the Congress of the United States, by voice vote, reauthorized the Export-Import Bank. Now, if you're in business, like Boeing and GE and thousands of other companies out there that are making products in the United States, selling them overseas, the idea that the Congress would, by voice vote, reauthorize the bank had to make you believe that this model of doing business would be made available to you. Here we are later down the road, a lot of concern about the bank, and some people actually want to do away with it. I understand free markets pretty well, and I would love to live in a world where no country interfered in the marketplace at all, and that the best products would win based on a level playing field. But why do we have the Export-Import Bank? It's about 70 years old. There's a long record here. Products made in America sold overseas, sometimes because of the volatile nature of the region in question, traditional banks won't lend money. So what happened about 70 years ago is we created a bank to help us export products. And that bank, the Export-Import Bank, as Senator Cantwell said, makes money, doesn't lose money, and has been a sound way to get American-made products into the international marketplace. Here's the reality. Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Britain, Brazil, China, and India all have export banks of their own. The G7 countries that we compete against between 2006 and 2010 doubled the amount of Ex-Im financing available in their countries. This is what American businesses are competing against. Our good friend up north, Canada, is 1/10 our size. The Canadian Ex-Im Bank did $100 billion worth of financing for Canadian-made products last year compared to $32 billion in support of American manufacturers. The only area of our economy that's really been strong lately is exports. So imagine this. America does away with the Export-Import Bank. All the countries I just described have their banks available to their manufacturers. Boeing makes planes in Washington and in South Carolina. 8 out of 10 planes being manufactured in Charleston, South Carolina by Boeing aircraft, the 787, are sold based on export-import financing. 8 out of 10. That's why they needed a second line of production. They're competing against Airbus. France has 3 export-import banks. China's export-import bank is larger than the United States, Germany, Canada, and Britain combined. Now, it's one thing to do reform, it's another thing to unilaterally surrender. It's one thing to lead the world, it's another thing to put the people who make products in America at risk unnecessarily. The legislation in the House did compel the President, the Department of Commerce, and Treasury to try to get these export-import banks wound down over time. If we could do that, great, because I think the American worker and American companies can compete anywhere in the world on a level playing field. At the end of the day, this is about whether or not we're going to unilaterally surrender. We're weeks away. Senator Corker has a good amendment, a decent amendment, but it doesn't quite get us to where we need to be at this late hour. One part of his amendment is that you can't make a loan under the Export-Import Bank until the company proves that the other countries in question are not offering loans in that area. That's pretty hard to do when countries like China are not very transparent. So this amendment is billed as good government, and I know his motivations are sound. He's not ideologically against the bank, but at this late hour, it will bring the legislation down, and quite frankly, the second prong of what he's proposing, I think, is a real burden to put on American businesses at a time when it's hard enough already to create jobs in America. So to those who want to end the bank without other countries doing so, I think you would be doing a great disservice to people in this country who are selling products overseas. In my state alone, you would be destroying the ability of Boeing Company to grow in South Carolina. GE makes gas turbines in Greenville, South Carolina. 1/3 of those turbines made in Greenville are sold with EXIM financing. If you can get the other parts of the world to do this, count me in. Until we do it together, I'm going to allow this bank to stay in business because it makes money, it doesn't lose money. There's a difference between leading the world and putting your companies at risk in a world based on reality. And the reality is that export-import financing by our competitor nations is growing, is not being reduced. So this bill that passed the House was 330 votes. We live in a time in Congress where you can't hardly declare Sundays a holiday. But 330 members of the House voted to extend this bank for 3 years with reforms. Count me in the reform camp. Some people say this bank has kind of gotten out of its lane, is making loans that really are not traditionally export-import loans. I agree with that. Some people say the bank's not transparent enough. I agree with that. Bottom line, it has been reformed. Not as much as some would like, but it definitely has been reformed. 62% of the Republican conference in the House voted to reauthorize this. So I want to acknowledge Representative Cantor, Representative Hoyer, Tim Scott, and my delegation that tried to bring about reform. So at the end of the day, the Senate now is receiving a product that went through the House, a lot of give and take. They produced a compromise, as Senator Cantwell said, that be different than I would have wrote, but it truly is reform. It allows 3-year extension of the bank at $140 billion with reforms that are quite frankly, I think, common sense. And 62% of the House Republicans supported this. The Tea Party was split. So at the end of the day, we have a decision to make as a Senate. Are we going to allow this bank to fail? Or are we going to allow the bank to stay in business under a new way of doing business? I think it would be a travesty and a detrimental event to the economy of this country if this bank were to go out of business and everybody we compete with, their banks are doubling in size. If you want to grow the footprint in America of selling products made in America overseas, this bank has a niche. Where you cannot find traditional financing, this bank allows American products to be sold, and I think a very sound business practice. The bank is making money. The capitalization requirements, the one thing I can tell you about the bank, it's been around for 70 years, and there are no subprime mortgages here. This is about selling American products to a willing buyer overseas where you can't find traditional financing. And our friends in China, sometimes they're not our friends. They manipulate their currency. They steal intellectual property. Their bank is going like gangbusters. And the last thing I'm going to do with my vote is take an American company that's struggling to make it, creating jobs in America through selling products overseas, and put them at disadvantage against the Chinese or any other country that's doing business. We will wind these things together, or we will stay in business to allow those in America to make products and sell them overseas. From a South Carolina perspective, this is a very big deal. It was a big deal to get Boeing to come to South Carolina. This is a request by Boeing and many other small businesses like Mount Vernon Mills to keep the program around. I will end where I started. 6 years ago, those people in the manufacturing community had the bank reauthorized by voice vote. They set up a business model assuming the bank was going to be around because nobody even objected to it enough to get a roll call. 6 years later, we can't make wild radical change. We made reforms, but the worst thing we could do is tell the business community 6 years ago by voice vote this bank will be in place, and 6 years later do away with it when no one else is doing away with their banks. That makes no sense to me. That is not good government. That, to me, is unilateral surrender. I don't want to unilaterally disarm when we're competing against Soviets in the Cold War, and I sure as heck don't want to unilaterally disarm in a world economy very much interconnected. So these amendments, most of them are designed to wind the bank down. They're ideologically driven. Senator Corker is trying to make it better, but there's a component to his amendment that I think would make it very difficult for our companies to get a loan. So at the end of the day, we need to vote these amendments down and pass the House product. And thank you, Mr. President. To the members of the House, Republicans and Democrats, you work this out among yourselves in a way that I think the Senate should embrace and endorse. And to Senator Reid and Senator McConnell, we're allowing votes on an important piece of legislation. The Senate is operating in the best traditions of the United States Senate. People have their say. People get to vote. Here's my say. Bring your amendments to the floor. I respect your ideological position. I respect the idea that free markets is where we want to go. But I'm asking my colleagues not to put American businesses at risk at a time when our economy is on its knees. Do not destroy this bank at a time when competitor nations are doubling the size of theirs. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate my colleague from South Carolina coming down to talk about this important tool for U.S. manufacturers and why it's important in his state and why we need to get on the business of passing this House legislation that was a compromise and involved many people, and as my colleague from South Carolina stated, a very robust vote out of the U.S. House of Representatives. I'd also like to say a few words about my colleague's amendment. Senator Corker, I'll trust with my colleague, says from South Carolina that the amendment may be seen as a reform of the system, well-intended, but I can tell you it will have very, very adverse effects. The Corker amendment basically is calling for a 10% capital ratio requirement. It's not really based in any fact or reason. The bank has had a default rate of less than 2%, 1.5%. So raising the reserve ratio would have a very adverse effect on the bank itself.